Hi, my name is Dr. Rayshawn Ray, aiming to speak truth to power, and this is my daily thought. Donald Trump and what he's saying about stop and frisk is highly problematic. And the reason why it's highly problematic, so if you actually watch the debate and watched a person who can't necessarily handle people asking them questions and a person actually responding with a coherent response, one of the things he talked about was how we deal with crime in the United States and what his response was to claims about police brutality and the fact that black lives aren't valued the same as other lives. Donald Trump essentially proceeded to talk about how we need to bring back and revitalize stop and frisk. Secretary Clinton, on the other hand, talked about systemic forms of racism and why we need to deal with that, which I completely agree with. Now, why is stop and frisk problematic? Well, first off, one thing that we have to realize is that stop and frisk is actually still around in many respects as it relates to jump outs and the other ways that black and brown bodies are policed on public streets and on private streets. What jump outs are is, say if there are a group of young boys, teenagers, who are waiting to catch the bus after school. Well, police officers would roll up, normally in an unmarked vehicle, and literally do jump outs on these individuals to try to startle them, scare them, try to see if they have something on their person, normally being aggressive with them, coming up on them, throwing them up against the wall, frisking them, and if they don't find anything, they will hop back in their car and leave. A lot of these jump outs and the ways that bodies are patrolled and policed are rarely ever captured by police reports, right? And this is the reason why we need body cameras, right? We need to be able to document the pervasive ways that we see these sort of things play out. Now, as it relates to stop and frisk, the reason why stop and frisk is problematic, and there are a couple of studies to highlight this. In 2011, or data from 2011, New York City stop and frisk data had data on about 685,000 stops, so close to 700,000 stops done in New York City. And they broke this down by race, and they also broke it down by whether or not a person had contraband on their person, so drugs or guns or other types of weapons, or had a previous criminal record, or was doing something illegal at the time, right, and was actually caught in the act. Now, in theory, stop and frisk can make a whole lot of sense, right? The point is that you see somebody looking shady or suspicious, and police officers are supposed to be trained to be able to recognize that suspicion and catch people when they're in the act, right? Part of this broken windows policing. So if we see a broken window, we want to deal with the broken window, because then that broken window spreads to breaking out the entire window or the entire window sill and other parts of the house. So sort of this neighborhood decay is essentially what stop and frisk is trying to deal with. Now, if we think in basketball terms, 1 out of 2 people who are stopped by the police, or say baseball terms, 1 out of 3 will probably have something on them, will probably be doing something illegal, right? Watching sports, if a person was 1 out of 3 successful in doing this, I could probably feel okay with that, right? I ask my students this question every semester. Most of my students say, I would want the police to be at least 1 out of 2, so 50%, correct in who they stop and profile, right? Because essentially stop and frisk is profiling, right? So in other words, they would say, out of 2 people that are stopped, I want at least 1 of those people to actually have something on them, have a previous or have a record where they have an outstanding warrant, have drugs, have guns, have weapons, right? I would actually lower than 1 out of 3, right? So 1 out of 2, you're an all-star in basketball, you're shooting 50%. If you're 1 out of 3, you're batting .333 in baseball, you're an all-star with a few home runs and some RBIs. I'd be cool with that, right? Well, what if I told you that this data, that this study on close to 700,000 stops from 2011 in New York City found that police were only correct 2% of the time. 2% of the time. 2%. Not 33%, not 50%, nowhere near. 2% of the time. This is the reason why the New York State Supreme Court Supreme Court ruled stop and frisk as unconstitutional. Unconstitutional, right? That stop and frisk was actually infringing on the constitutional rights of blacks and Latinos. Why is this? Well, 51% of all stops were blacks, a majority of whom were men, right? A smaller percentage were Latinos and a much smaller percentage were whites, right? Basically almost in the single digits, right? Now, Mayor Bloomberg, who was mayor at the time after Giuliani, came out and said, oh, well, we actually need to stop white men less, right? Well, that's interesting because actually what the study found was that when blacks and Latinos are stopped, police were less likely to find something on them on average. And when white people were stopped, they were more likely to find something on them, right? Now, the way I interpret this is that police officers have a very good idea of whether or not a white person is being shady or being suspicious. But for blacks and Latinos, they don't. Instead, the black and brown skin becomes part of the suspicion. So this means that 9 out of 10 individuals stopped by the police during stop and frisk encounters were doing nothing wrong. 9 out of 10. But yet they were brutalized. Several of these individuals were beaten, right? Some individuals were arrested for resisting arrest even though they did nothing wrong. And these were just the stops that we have a record of. And the unfortunate part is that if you actually listen to police officers who are candid, they will tell you, you know, we're not worried about quality, we're worried about quantity. We have quotas. We are told to go to certain neighborhoods. That's what we do. They don't care how many people we stop as long as we get our stops and as long as we get arrest. Right? And we saw that in Ferguson with the Department of Justice report. We also saw that in Baltimore with the Department of Justice report. Right? One other argument people make that I hear as it relates to police killings, people say, oh, well, of course, black people are killed more by the police, right? They commit more crime and they shoot at police officers more often. Well, see, this is the thing. We're not talking about people who commit crime and people who are shooting at the police. We're talking about the people who, if they allegedly committed a crime, whether or not the crime fits the penalty, right? But more importantly, the fact that studies show that unarmed black people who are not fighting back at the police are more likely to get killed than whites doing similar things, meaning nothing. That is the central problem. Right? So we're primarily talking about the ones who are unarmed, who aren't committing a crime, and yet and still they're more likely to be killed. So as it relates to the presidential election and certain things that Donald Trump is saying, from putting up the wall to saying he doesn't pay taxes and that means he's smart. I mean, we really have to think about what's going on here and who you're voting for, right? And if you are voting for someone who has racist, sexist, homophobic, actually talking about individuals who have certain accommodations, right, as it relates to mental and physical disabilities, then you become complicit in that. And your silence is your acceptance. And personally, I have to wonder what kind of person you are if you can actually support a person who does those sort of things, right? It really lets me know where you stand as it relates to being on the side of equality, equity and justice, or being on the other side. So as it relates to stop and frisk was ruled unconstitutional for a reason. And we actually need to make sure that it's not put in practice, because I don't know any business where it has a 2% success rate that we let it continue to go on. Oh yeah, that's right. Unless, of course, you're really just trying to get certain people who might be black and brown off the street for no reason, right? To just police them. Then it's fine. So this is my daily thought, right? Conversations matter like Black Lives and Books, and I hope this has sparked one.